A wonderful good morning, everyone, back to our main panel of today. We have here a little bit a different setup as before. You see, I have already 5 panelists with me live and from different regions. And whom you don't see is Yvonne Jamal, who is unfortunately ill today. And we had a short phone call this morning, and she even wanted to do it still, but I think that would have been a challenge for her as well as for everyone else because, quite sick. But I'm super excited to have all my panelists here. And as I'm always the one speaking here so much, I would actually ask you to do a quick introduction, which is then more on the spontaneous side. But yeah, maybe we can go with everyone saying like one sentence in which company you are working, what's your role, and from where you are here today, because I think that's quite a nice mixture. And I would go with Sonya first. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, love to. Thank you so much for having me, Lara. My name's Sonya Bhonsle. I'm Global Head of Value Chains at CDP. I've been kicking around the Scope 3 arena for the best part of 2 decades. Was even involved in what I still call the new greenhouse gas protocol, but it's so old they're refreshing it. I'm based in London and I'm very excited for the chat today.
Amazing. And I would hand it over to Kasha.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yasha Dulko-Gaszyna, and I'm head of sustainability for IKEA in Germany. This is where I moved in something like 2 years ago. And before that, I was head of sustainability for IKEA in Poland for almost a decade. Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for having us or being with us on that panel. And then I see Mats for me also in the first row. How are you from where you're listening in? What's your role?
Great. Thank you for having me. And it's so good to be here from the sunny Stockholm. So I'm Mats Pellbäck Scharp, head of sustainability at group for Erricson. Really working in the telecom and digitalization side of things. So super excited to be here and talk a little bit about what our industry is doing and what we are doing as a company.
Yeah, that will be a very exciting panel for me as well. I have been looking forward to it quite a lot. And then Leo, I also see. How are you?
Hi, good morning, Lara, and good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here today. It's so delighted to have this kind of summit. So very quickly, I'm a global procurement senior manager for Danone and all the product of Danone or Danone, depending on the country. More looking at logistics and especially air and ocean freight globally. So, of course, a very huge footprint as well.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, I'm joined with Yasha. So I think a lot of you might know him, but please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone from Berlin, also sunny today. I'm Yasha, co-founder and CEO at The Climate Choice. Mainly work with our clients on supplier data and engagement challenges, so data collection, analysis, and really happy to be here and exchange today. And thank you.
Okay, then thanks a lot for the introduction. And today our biggest challenge or for the whole summit is actually making transformation happen, and also in Scope 3. So we have heard before that this is really the area where it becomes tricky and that not everyone maybe dares to challenge it or go into it, and some have. So I think we have some people in the panel who already did a few steps. But still, the challenge is huge. And I think it's one thing to see it on statistics and like in general, but the other to hear really from the practitioners, like how do you address that? What are the challenges you have to overcome? And that's maybe where I would love to start before we go into best practices and opportunities. And on that side, I would love to start with Leo. So what are the challenges you have been addressing along the supply chain? How do you go into supply chain transformation and decarbonization?
Thank you very much for opening the floor to me. I think, to be very honest with you, it's, of course, we work for a big corporation, and even I think for 10 years one, and there is a lot of challenges today. So I will try to list them very quickly. I think from my side, first, since 2018 or 19, the first real difficulty in that journey is measuring exactly measuring with a reliable process what our different emissions, and that's the first one. For Danone, in example, we have a lot of different emissions we measure, especially from milk with methanes or downstream transport, carbonization, and so on. So that for us has been and is still a main challenge to be sure that the data we are recouping from our different suppliers, plus the different platform we use, plus what we track ourselves makes sense and is consistent. That's a first real difficulty for us. Working globally on a corporation level, another real bottleneck we found is, of course, you have initiative all over the world, and sometimes it could be very hard to align on a global scale and a global initiative with the same objectives, roadmap, and so on. So, as you said in your second point that we will come, I think collaboration is definitely one of the huge enabler in that, and it's complicated, even I would not say for big companies, but for companies that work cross-continentally, to be able to track all of that and to be aligned on all the objectives and roadmap, especially on the visibility. I think another one it's a bit less understood or less shared, especially when you work in procurement, because procurement, especially downstream or upstream for Scope 3, we are managing a lot of the different flows, also for waste management. And one of the biggest is what is the targets, objectives for 2030, becoming carbon or methane neutral, given also the fact that we're just out of the pandemic, where most of the companies, not all, of course, depending on industries, but have faced financial difficulties. And also, if you take it more granular, where the transport industry have been completely round up for 2 years, and where now we see a lot of more capacity downstream to mitigate as well. So to sum it up, sorry, in one sentence is, how do we mitigate the procurement productivity pipeline we have in the meantime with the cost that is incurred by decarbonization of Scope 3 into your supply chain, because of course it has a cost. So I would say in a glance, that's the main areas I'm facing at this moment, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I totally love it. You gave me so many points that lead perfectly to my next question and next person, because you mentioned, how do you roll out a roadmap on an international scale? And also you kind of gave this procurement position, and then you have internally all these other stakeholders coming from sustainability. Yes. So maybe, Mats, you would be a perfect example for an international ambition in that area, and also more coming from the sustainability side. So what are your challenges and how you're addressing it in decarbonization of supply chains?
Thank you, Lara. It is, in fact, a really good question. But just before I go into that, to put this into perspective, I mean, when we talk about Scope 3, for Erricson, currently, we have over 90% of our Scope 3 downstream, so not in the supply chain. So, and that is from the energy used in our products, which is 80% electricity. So as our customers are moving and transitioning themselves in a quite a rapid pace over to renewables, then supply chain becomes more and more important. So until now, we have focused very much on energy performance. But now we are looking at the supply chain more and more, and how we can work with that. And for us, of course, it is, and we have reported on sort of Scope 1, 2, and 3, and have a very good coverage of that since many years. But it has been based on generic data. It's life cycle data, generic data for aluminum, generic data for transport, so generic data for different parts of this. And now, as we are driving improvements in the supply chain and trying to change that, those improvements will not be captured if we don't go for product-specific data. So that is sort of the challenge now. How can we sort of collect the product-specific data? And then, of course, we have 24,000 suppliers, or more than 24,000 suppliers in Erricson. But we have also done based on sort of our life cycle assessments and finding the hotspots, we have said that, okay, we know that less than 200 of them is sort of contributing with over 90% of the emissions in the supply chain. So then we can sort of focus in on sort of a number of suppliers that is manageable in a way for us to work with and collect the data from. So for us, it's really about, based on the big life cycle assessments, understanding the picture from the mine to sort of the recycling, then focusing on the hotspots, going there and working with those suppliers. And then, of course, we need to work with everybody else as well. But the focus is really to get that data from them and work directly with these suppliers. And we have had the target since now 3 years, I think, that they should have science-based targets. So that's sort of, it's a learning journey, it's a maturity journey on the supplier side to move them from sort of not having anything understanding. Some suppliers are really mature, even more than us, or more advanced than us in some senses, but many are not there yet, also of these high emitting suppliers. So then we need to move them. So starting by sort of setting the targets, then moving into being able to capture their own emissions, then being able to report it, and then we can go in and work with them on the data and the improvement. So that is our maturity journey. But the challenge is really the specific data.
Okay, that's quite a good insight. So on top of data that's leading, and then it's really the collaboration and engagement of suppliers and really training them, upskilling them, collaboration
Exactly.
in that journey rather than a top-down process. We have Kasia as a third, I think, expert from the field, from an international company. How is a challenge for you going into supply chain decarbonization?
I would say I have a little bit different perspective than the colleagues, because I'm representing the brand and representing the general sustainability agenda that includes, of course, the whole value chain, but on the level of the country, because I represent and work for Germany. And it's because we, of course, we work on the franchisee system. My job's profile is, and the job and task are very much different. But just to understand how we operate at IKEA, I mean, we've got the strategic plans for over 10 years, agreed among all the countries, all the stakeholders. And this is how we work, where climate is very much interconnected with social agenda and circularity, especially. So the just transition towards becoming climate positive. And from practical point of view, I would not take it as granted for myself, any grants for that of course the calculation, connection with science-based targets and all the measurements needs to be taken on the group level. And of course, it belongs to good competencies of people who take care of that and really spend years on calculation, validation, and with help of a lot of consultants probably, and people who are really dedicated to this topic. And then it comes with great tool that is super required, digital tool to countries like mine, that is like the biggest one and has a really big meaning to make the transformation happen, to execute. And so that's why now we come to the points. What does it really exactly mean? If we look at the yearly emissions, around 26 million of tons. This is the value chain emissions of IKEA. 16 million tons of that is the scope 3. So, of course, there are tasks connected with our own operations that are already a big challenge. They are mostly connected, of course, with operations, with energy, heating, or whatever you name it. And then we've got the similar topics and content on the supplier base. And not to say about everything, I can see, especially in the last years, the biggest progress on the other side, of course, challenges that makes sense is connected with the production, with the suppliers in countries where the production is the biggest. For IKEA world, that means mostly Poland, China, partially India. So really to focus there, to help suppliers and to support them with switching to renewable energy on site, And then in our case, when it's not possible, switching to renewable electricity. And then role of brand or the company, the group, is to support them. Of course, it usually takes years, but we can see a lot of progress here. So that will be a super practical approach, and it's super visible on then the calculation and the results connected with decarbonization of the supply chain. But not mentioning any details on the country like Germany that is not super production driven country. We've got other free scope challenges like mobility, where of course the supply chain is also happening, a little bit different scope with this, but also everything that connects with the products and prolonging product life when it's really on the in the houses of millions of households.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We have really 3 different perspectives. So I think that shows like how complex also the challenge is, right? Scope 3 is not scope 3. It has different categories. And then the perspectives from within the companies are different, from procurement to sustainability to international level to country-based level, and like which part of you are addressing. And I think Sonya is an expert in that area, like overseeing like all these different approaches and how companies are dealing with it. What are the challenges that you see also from the work and resources CDP is doing in that area?
Thanks so much, Lara. Fascinating. I found myself nodding so much I had to stop because I was going to give myself neck ache. So everything the panelists have said very much resonates with what we're seeing at CDP. I'm going to take a quick step back and say, for anyone who's on this call and is saying, thinking, oh my God, they all sound like they're really far ahead. I haven't even started on scope 3. You're not alone. So CDP collects data from about 18,000 companies around the world every year. About 71% of them are reporting their scope 1 and 2, and under 30% are reporting their scope 3. And even with that, most are starting with business travel. But as all my learned panelists have highlighted, the massive emissions, I mean, for some companies they are downstream, Matt, I'll happily agree with you on that. But let's look at upstream. Most companies on average are 11 times that upstream. The emissions are 11 times that upstream than it is of their scope 1 and 2. So there's a phenomenal opportunity. And when you get up to the likes of retailers, you're hitting 27 times that of their operations. So it's a really big source of emissions. Here's the other. For anyone who's thinking, I need to make a business case to take action on this, I've said it for years, but I think only people have only started believing me in the last 2 years. Scope 3 is getting sexy. It is. It's a really hot topic. The regulators are starting to jump on the bandwagon. The US SEC is debating it. The ESRS, very applicable to this region, has gone all out on it. ISSB won't move forward without it. Like, scope 3 is being phenomenally interesting to the stakeholders. And it's not just the regulators. We work with, I think it's in excess of 500 investors. And I've never been so popular in my life. They are really interested in scope 3. And I'm going to come back to exactly what Matt, Leo, and Kasia, is that right? Perfect. Have said. They're picking up on 2 fronts. One is the data. Now, the data is really interesting, and I'm going to talk a bit about what Leo and Matt's pulled out. What we've seen is those that are reporting it have started to move from a transition of just using conversion factors and output methodology. So I spend 20 million on chairs. I obviously don't spend 20 million on chairs, but 20 million times emissions factor of chairs equals. And they've started to ask their suppliers for primary data. It's still very much only the better performing companies, but I'm seeing that transition. This year, 13% of those that are reporting said they were moving towards hybrid methodologies, bringing in that primary data. If I look at pre-Paris, I think that was a changing point. It was around when SBTs launched. Pre-Paris, it was under 2%. So what we're seeing is the leadership thinking, okay, I've got to talk to my stakeholders about Scope 3. How do we make this real? How do I take what are phenomenal numbers, like 22 million? These are extraordinary numbers of emissions. And how do I make it palatable? And engaging the suppliers and bringing their emissions. So you can say, it's 22 million, but it's going down because the top, like 12% of my suppliers are now 100% renewable electricity. They've zeroed out their scope of 2. 38% of my spend have SBTs, and that's where the engagement bit comes in. So scope 3 is tying much more closely to what companies are doing to talk to their suppliers to make that story really interesting. Again, if you haven't started doing that, don't feel bad. Only 38% of companies reported to CDP last year, so they're actively engaging with their suppliers on climate change. I was asked by Forbes what would be a really good target for next year, because we refresh the data every year, and I think my comms team was slightly and the journalist was slightly surprised when I was like, well, it'd be nice to know that for every company that reports, engages if the other doesn't. So I'm aiming for 50%, which actually is quite a sad fact, really. So if only 38% are engaging with their suppliers, then, you know, in excess of 60 aren't, or just under 60 actually aren't. And that needs to change. That supply, that we've got to get these conversations going. And then there is a scaling list to all the various different things that you could do that are really best practice. But I'll stop there. But from what my colleagues are talking about, it very much echoes with what we're seeing. But if you're sat there thinking, oh God, it's like 7 steps to where I'm the next Erricson, Danone or IKEA, don't worry, you're not alone. But do start taking those steps now and wherever you can.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that one. I think we also had it yesterday, one sentence that stuck with me from Fritz Kohler, a rather smaller sustainability company in Germany. But they said, actually, when you start doing it, you feel it's possible. And that is such a change agent, right? It feels overwhelming, but if you go into it, there might be a solution.
I was on a panel with Walmart, and they talked about CDP getting them stuck on the emissions reduction, and they likened it to high. And then there was a lot of comparisons about a gateway drug. Like, once you do a little bit, you want to do more. And it's the same with supplier engagement. You know, once you can see 1 or 2 of your suppliers, you know, going from, this is a real example, and it's a quick, cheap laugh, and then I'll stop talking. But I was working with a consumer goods company about 4 or 5 years ago, and they wrote out to their suppliers saying, please could you disclose, we want to work with you on your carbon emissions, please could you disclose your greenhouse gas emissions to CDP, and then all the information about how to disclose to us. And they got a reply from a not small company. Like, the contract they had with them was in excess of 20 million, so not small company. The reply went like this: thank you very much for the opportunity. I don't think it applies to us. We don't own any greenhouses. Scary.
That's a good one.
Funny and scary at the same time. So every time you can convince someone, you know, bring them on this bandwagon, it is a gateway drug.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe then that is a perfect one to hand over to Yasha. Like, hearing all these challenges, does that sound familiar to you? We had the topic of data, we had the topic of engagement, maybe of also some companies being way far ahead, and then some others, suppliers, being confused. What are the challenges you see when working with customers?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So yeah, I think like I can also like add on. First of all, I had to not all the also this the whole time, because like that's the same things that we're seeing, of course, and I can just very highly agree with Sonya. It's so important to take steps, because like we're all early, we're all learning together how to address the challenge. So my perspective is I think twofold. First, I'm an entrepreneur since now 12-13 years. I try to make climate relevant procurement decisions in my previous company and miserably failed, and then learning from CDP to that actually there are most of the emissions are coming from upstream from the upstream supply chain. it really dawned that like we need to make climate relevant procurement decisions. We need to engage our suppliers. Otherwise, climate targets are really at risk. So that was kind of like my first perspective, and now my perspective is really to work with companies, first of all with procurement teams, but also with sustainability and climate teams, to support them with their data challenges, I guess, and also providing kind of like the data that the data needs, kind of like to the different departments for decision making. And I think like what we're seeing is like very much what Leo, Mats, Kasia said already. The first of all, I think it's a stakeholder. It's very like it's a stakeholder challenge, right? In large organizations, there's so many stakeholders involved to make a decision on are we engaging our suppliers, what are the risks maybe, etc. Then also what data is needed, right? Data is such a big possible. There's so many possibilities, especially around climate and sustainability data, and then. Ideally, of course, and that's what Matt said, we want product-specific information. So there's also a lot of challenges on top of that we're seeing. So the data doesn't exist, like most of the times it doesn't exist yet, right? There's very few companies that can provide product-level data at quality and comparability that is needed. And then it's also about making sure that data can be used, right? So it's documented. You understand how was it calculated. I mean, I can tell, for example, from suppliers that we work with that, telling us, another supplier said this is the product carbon footprint of their product, and we have the same product. And if they would have calculated it the same way as we did, this result couldn't be true. So there's a lot of things going on around, I think. Like thankfully, of course, this is all getting more standardized, and there's more work on doing be done on that front. But that is a really big issue. So comparability, consistency of data, you want to track over time, right? So there's a lot of challenges around that. And then, of course, there's a lot of manual processes, I think, and that's where we also focus on at the Climate Choice, because basically we're streamlining processes, right? We want to make it easy for companies to engage thousands of suppliers and also find the right data sources, because if there's for example, CDP data, right? It's great. It's really can be used already from companies and should be used. And we don't want to build data silos, because suppliers also don't want to report on 20 different platforms. So I think these are some of the challenges that we see and that we're working on to solve, of course, and support companies with these streamlining of these processes. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you again, Lara, to go to the next.
Yeah, I think what I take out of this first round of collecting challenges, that's maybe a weird way of starting the discussion, right? We always want to hear the best practices first, but I think it really gives an amazing overview of how many different topics you have to have in mind and how many different stakeholders from intern and extern in providing tools, working together, making sure the outcome is there, also having it in a data format. And that, I think, all points to the direction of collaboration. So what we get out of that first round is it doesn't stop with your own company. It doesn't stop with a person who said the fastest, I'm going to work on that challenge. It always needs your own internal team, maybe in your company, to go into it and make sure you know what you want to collect as data and with whom you need to work with and how you want to bring that sustainability strategy into action. And that's maybe where I would love to hand over to Kasia again. And in your role as sustainability manager, like how do you make sure, or how do you proceed in that position, bringing really procurement and sustainability departments together and like enabling together actions and going in that first stop of internal collaboration? What are your actions there?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't really want to disappoint you, but I don't really think that my role has a, let's say, superpower to make things happen. What I really believe and what we try to practice, it doesn't mean that we are super perfect, but it's something that we really try for years and with some steps, is to really integrate sustainability agenda into the business. And I would name two very practical things that we do. First of all, one is that our country chiefs, country managers, for each country, are at the same time chief sustainability officer. And this has a very powerful meaning with integration of sustainability mindset and KPIs and everything that we do, or our goals, into the general agenda and everybody's job. So, I don't know, from selling, decoration, interior designers, logistics, and food, or everybody, because everybody has their appointed KPIs connected with sustainability as their job. And then there's a role, of course, for my department to monitor, to indicate, to show the path, you know, to decide what is really sustainable, what not, what kind of choices we should do, and advisory and monitoring. And then if you look specifically about the supply chain. So of course, IKEA is a kind of brand, probably like Erricson or many, many others, with extremely big supply chain that is split all around the world. And for many years already, you know, we are, let's say, it's connected on the other side with cost saving and monitoring of the whole supply chain, and then also impact of the brand. And we have something that it actually has a full process behind. It's the supplier code of conduct connected with the whole mechanism and system to work on environmental and social KPIs and ambitions within the value chain. We now actually celebrated already 20 years of this code of conduct, so the whole system connected, and it is very purely dedicated. It's part of the job of the procurement. So actually, I'm feeling sometimes I'm even less competent in sustainability than the procurement. So because they are really doing it on everyday basis with thousands of suppliers every day. And I believe this is, of course, it's still not done from the perspective that it's done once, and because the topic develops. And just to give you an example, of course, the topics that we have started with to really make happen is decent work conditions, or I don't know, child labor, really securing the children's rights, then the environmental aspects, and recently in the last years, animal rights that, for example, were not that impactful or needed, I don't know, 20 years ago. So I can see this develops, and we are at the moment at the, actually, even the 6th version of the whole systematic approach, and I can see a lot of progress here. So just a conclusion, I really believe the integration and not really putting so much pressure just for sustainability, guys, because this is really the business who makes the change. Sustainability can just give you the direction and the proper definitions and the content.
That makes me have the same feeling as Sonya. I'm constantly nodding. So it's amazing to see what you said, like giving these small, what you might call small best practices, but really seeing that there is responsibility on a chief level. And you said like the country managers being in sustainability. I think that's an amazing progress that a lot of companies still have to bring in, like someone handling that topic, and then on this level. And yeah, also really seeing the power in procurement. So everything is shifting a lot, and that there's not a single person who needs to solve the whole thing, but collaboration. And I think, Mats, you were already bringing in before that you see a huge challenge in really having a program that's empowering also the suppliers. And Erricson, as well as IKEA, is like member of the Exponential Roadmap. Maybe not everyone knows that so far. So maybe you want to explain us a little bit what this initiative is about and how you, through that, provide suppliers also a guideline and an actionable framework to be part of your climate journey.
Sure, and I mean, let us start a little bit from the beginning of the Exponential Roadmap then, because I mean, in 2018, in the climate meeting that was arranged in California by Governor Brown, the first report from the Exponential Roadmap was presented on the solutions how to sort of halve the emissions by 2030 and so on. And back to what Sonya talked about earlier, and these days there were 2%. So we felt a lot like we were preaching to the choir, because we met the same companies in all different conferences, and everybody was sort of green and nice and happy together, but really struggling. What can we do with the other 98% that are not there? So how do we get them aboard? And what we realized was that, okay, we can put requirements on our suppliers, right? But as they don't know how to solve them, we need to help them meet those requirements. So that's sort of the starting point of the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders work that is run within the Exponential Roadmap initiative. It is, in fact, leading companies working together to develop different things and then sharing that for free. So together we have, with the Race to Zero and others, created the SME Climate Hub, which is a really fantastic. And it's not only for small and medium-sized enterprises. It's for everybody that is, like Sonya talked about, are struggling how to start, where to start, what do I do, how do I even sort of understand my own footprint and scope 1 and 2, and I don't even understand anything of this. So it's a toolbox for everyone that is starting up their work. And together with CDP, we have also developed a simplified reporting tool. So it's sort of within this scope, there is a simplified tool for smaller companies to get started with also the reporting. But not only the reporting, it's also free tools for calculating your own footprint. There is the 1.5 degree playbook. So it's a guideline for getting started, for companies to get started, but also how to get started. Also what Sonya talked about earlier about how do you get started with supply chain work. Yeah, there is the supplier engagement guide, how to get started with the supplier engagement. So I think I encourage everyone to really take a look at the SME Climate Hub and go in at the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders to get this. If you're wondering and struggling with how to start, all of these things are free. And I mean, we have worked together with IKEA, it's Unilever, it's a lot of our customers, Microsoft is there, Google. So it's a lot of leading companies that work together, developing these tools and then sharing them for free, because we share the same supply chains on different levels. And as I said, you can work with 150, 200 suppliers, but you cannot work with 24,000. You have to do that sort of in an organized and structured way and all together across different leading companies. So I really encourage everybody to sort of go in and check that and also sign up to it, because then we can share the reporting and everything. So that is really what I would like to share. And then, I mean, for your own sake, then you can use tools like the Climate Choice and get that data into your own system and your own reporting. But that's the second step. I mean, working with suppliers and everything, that is really, I think, a struggle. So please do that.
I have a second question to that, because what I found super interesting is we always talk about collaborating with the suppliers, but what actually that initiative brings is, like you said, leading companies working together to do the same program. So maybe you can share a little bit on that side, because Sonya pointed out before as well, right? It can be so overwhelming, and maybe some people, or that's what I hear often from customers, I have the feeling everyone is already doing that. I'm the only one who hasn't tackled that. And then on the other hand, you see there are like leading huge companies who also, at least it looks like, have the need to collaborate on it because it's such a big topic. So what is maybe your reason to work there also across industries with other companies together in such an initiative rather than doing it alone? Well, maybe you can highlight that.
Yeah, I think that is based on the learning. I mean, two things. Talked earlier about sort of the code of conduct, and that started off way back with conflict minerals, where we started to work together on the conflict-free smelters initiative as an industry. We realized that we are not competing on putting requirements on suppliers and lifting them up. We are competing on the market. And then we can compete on sort of good designs and working with the right and strategic partnership with suppliers on products, but not on them having good working conditions, not on them meeting environmental requirements, not on them having sort of better practices when it comes to carbon footprint. That is not a competitive area. So we realized that it's much easier for suppliers if they get the same requirements from all their customers. That's also what we see. We have like 200 operators that we deliver products to, and if they come with individual questionnaires and things, that's totally overwhelming. Even if we sort of could answer all the questions, I mean, just changing them a little bit makes it super difficult. So it is much more powerful to work together on these topics. And the other part is what I said earlier. I think we realized that it's difficult. We can put the requirements, but we have to help the suppliers to meet the requirements. That's what we learned with sort of the working conditions and work hours and so on, is that it didn't happen anything. We were there auditing, and we found the same problem over and over again. But then when we started to do supplier improvement programs and getting them to understand why they should do this, then suddenly things happen. So we said, let's do it right from the start now when we go out and put the climate requirements on them. So let's help them meet that and put together the toolbox. And apparently that was very, very attractive, because we managed to get a lot of our customers joining, but also a lot of other leading companies seeing that, yeah, this is a really good initiative. So I think, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I would love to switch a little bit around, because, right, you mentioned already that this collaboration is key, and that, like, collecting the right data, and as you pointed out, right, that's what we work on. So on that one, I would also love to bring Yasha and then Sonya also into it, because you both are in that area. So maybe Yasha, what do you see when working with companies? Like, what are the collective benefits from working together there, and like bringing transparency, and why does it need collaboration in that area? What do you think in that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, like what Mats said, right? It's important to not invent your own standard. I guess that's, that's typically where companies start, right? To like, it's also a mix of things, right, that are often thrown into one bucket. So what we see, a lot of companies are, for example, really stuck or like really focused on the calculation part versus the actually taking actions on decarbonization, right? And that what Mats just mentioned, right? Starting to working with your suppliers has already an effect, and that is really, really important to start that, and especially then use standards that are already in the market, and that can maybe then provide you with relevant information, which is not then necessarily on the product level, but at least on understanding on how suppliers are managing this transition to a low carbon economy, right? And how do they manage climate internally? I think that's something I think that we see a lot. And then I think also as mentioned, climate is a very specific topic. It's the same for all companies, so this is also an advantage, right? Compliance topics are sometimes not sometimes, but are very different in very different industries. So chemical industry needs to do something differently than maybe the textile industry, etc. So it's also the good thing about climate, that this is really something that we have agreed that it's the same for all companies, right? We have CO2 emissions to measure. We know that target setting, science-based targets, is becoming more and more popular, and striving companies to also get their suppliers to set targets. So I think this is the good part about climate, and I think it's really important to start taking action, because it has already an impact, right? If you ask your suppliers about the topic of climate, it already drives the first step of change. But yeah, want to hand over to Sonya and hear about her.
I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it. I'm just going to give a few examples. Everything Matt and Yasha said is completely true. And one of the useful things about being at CDP is you've got backstage passes to watch how it works. So to Matt's point, we worked with, I think it was about 7 or 8 auto companies. And this was before they signed SBTs, just so you know. Now, any one of those 8 would happily push each other under the bus. Like, Ford would lose no sleep if General Motors suddenly profits went down. They're fiercely competitive. But what they kept hearing from their suppliers is, what is it that you want, and what they can, or the others are saying something different. And then they got together, and it turned out they weren't actually saying something that different, but somebody might have been playing the game there a little. But they aligned on KPIs and asked them to, they all asked their suppliers to report through CDP. And they picked out a few KPIs, particularly one that stood out to me. It was on water, but it was a very low. It was like 5% of companies were dealing with reporting on water withdrawal. And they said, look, you may only supply one of us, you may supply 4 of us, but if you want to supply any of us, and they all want to supply all of them, this is going to be a question. And they got on a webinar and they all said it publicly. They even signed a letter. And it went up by 20% in 1 year, 20%, which is actually quite impressive. And then the following year, it got the same sort of reaction, because sometimes it takes 2 years. But the other thing I was going to point out is it's not just buyers that can collaborate together. Any stakeholders are getting wily. And I remember this because I was on the media tour for it. The investors and the purchasers actually got together to encourage some of the biggest committers in the world to set an SBT. And this was the headline that I remember. 37 trillion pressure group tells big emitters, get on board with climate science. I'll dig out a link for people. But the investors and some of the biggest purchasers in the world said, look, we are aligning to a 1.5 future. We can't do it without you. I can't meet my SBT without you. And so they combined their pressure. And so like this whole collaboration thing is gaining pace. And I think as we go forward, you're going to see much more of it, which is why it's really important to take all the action, all the steps now. I'll see if I can dig out that link.
Yeah, thank you. I really see, this point of what you said, right? All our climate targets and therefore science-based targets, if you have them already or not, we can just fulfill them together. And this is where I want to take Leo in, who was already busy answering questions. So maybe that's also the reminder for the audience. If you have questions, you can now put them to the Q&A. I try to bring in some as well. We are so good in the discussion, but I don't want to exclude you. And yeah, Leo, I think we discussed a lot now the topics of climate data and integrating suppliers on that part. But then obviously from your business model, you might have different topics as well, like biodiversity, deforestation, and so on. And who are the people, stakeholders you have to engage along the supply chain? What are the collaboration points to improve, or also best practices and aims you have?
A very good question. First of all, thanks. It's exactly what I wanted to say, and very good input from the panel as well. I just have again and again topics I want to speak about, and would not have enough time for sure. But let's be. I will try to bring here more business perspective, because I'm the business, and from if you are a SME or more a global company. So first of all, whatever your company are, your main 2 stakeholders you start or you go in the journey in the middle is sustainability department, definitely, and procurement. And I'm speaking scope free. I'm only speaking of scope free. If you don't have sustainability departments, the first thing to do is to find someone that get an ownership on sustainability, because no ownership, no target, no follow-up, no roadmap, blah, blah, blah. Second of all, procurement. Why? If we speak downstream, most of the time we're speaking about finished product or services that will engage physical flows that will impact environment. So 2 things to think about from my expertise. First of all is downstream, and thanks, Matt. You cannot go on 24,000 suppliers, but how do you do that? Of course, you have to pick your battle, like in the business. Make a Pareto, an 80-20, understand where your biggest emissions are, like the same with your spend. You are not spending 80% of your money to the same thing. So of course you will target the top ones. An example for Danone is only 3 of them on our carriers downstream, and mostly downstream will be waste management, recovery of the packaging, in example of your customers afterwards, and transport of finished product, and secondary transport to your warehousing as well. And thing. So that's the first thing. I would like to just come back a little bit on the collaboration, because this is key. You won't achieve anything in sustainability without internal and external cooperation. I want to bring you further in the thinking. You can bring scope free down and improve scope free working upstream. What does it mean? That's why I'm saying you should work with your procurement department. Why? Because there is something called design to cost. Design to cost, what I'm trying to say is that is the thing that you produce upstream that will cost you downstream in emission. So you will try to think, is what we do in Danone, how would you reduce your packaging? By this nature, you will reduce the payload you need for transportation downstream. By this, you will reduce the number of transport, and by this, the number of emission. And it's just one of them. It could be the full rate filling for the trucks. Are you sure that when you are paying your trucks full, a dedicated, they are full? Or is there still space? And there is many different things that you do upstream, and people don't think about it often, that will impact your downstream. And as Matt was saying, you have, I think, a first step, which is analyzing, understanding what is your footprint downstream, and afterward, how do you optimize your own product or service model to reduce scope 3? That's the first. Second one, it's my last one. Huh? Second one, very important, and that will come to the next point and to the previous point, which is what are the pain points, but also the advantages, is the distribution model. If you are scope 3, one of the first things to reduce scope 3 emission is to redefine your distribution model. Why would you go to a 600 kilometers warehouse when you can just deliver on the port? Maybe you need to change the port, and maybe you will need bam, 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 and it's a full analysis. But even that you are tiny or big, go to your business, go to your figures, and understand how you do business. Because often the model you do business, the place you do your warehousing to redistribute your different customers or selling points, whatever, how much the production plant is close to what you need in terms of raw materials, and a lot of things like this will drastically reduce scope 3. And I come back to my first point. For choosing the supplier, take your spend and your Pareto, because no need to work on a 1,000 supplier euro if you have one of 10 million and that you make a huge impact. Second, work on your distribution model and your suppliers, your commercial people, and your logistic operation to understand how can we maximize our transportation and also the reverse logistic. Danone, we have a lot of bottles, for Evian. Or Volvic. Some are plastic, some are glass, and for the glass one, we recover them most of the time. So I think that's a tremendous important. And to finish the loop with collaboration, you see that procurement, for me, we are a support function. So we are here in the middle to support each of the every function to make the business better. So if I can say sustainability, logistics, supply chain, I don't know how it's called in your company, and procurement would be the first one to cooperate before to go to suppliers. Last advice, organize meetings and workshop with your logistic people and so on, and your suppliers as well.
Yeah, I love the passion. I think it really shows it's a topic that has, that's why we did this huge challenge collection, right?
I forgot one. Sorry, I forgot one. Yeah, rush passion, but very important for the guys if you work with your procurement. When you choose your suppliers at the moment of the tender, put criteria of sustainability in your tenders. For us, we have a top 3 that are more than 50 million a year for the transport, for more than 40,000 containers a year worldwide. And the criteria of sustainability is the only one that put them in the gold segmentation and the top 3.
Yeah. No, I really, really love that. We have all these different insights, like, again, from the procurement side, what are really the practical tools and to implement it and bring your suppliers on board. And I think the Q&A is actually really large. We have to see how we integrate that afterwards as well. But I'm going to show one on the screen. So we got actually for Nana the question, how do you support your suppliers? Is it with financial benefits? Is it with knowledge? Do you have concrete examples? How does it tie into like financial decisions and so on? So maybe we can use that last question, so to say, as a roundup, and you can give your best practices, like really how to support your suppliers, how to go into that. And yeah, maybe if someone wants to start on Monday with their Scope 3 program, what is it you want them to know, like how to support your suppliers to go into that? And yeah, I would start with Kasia.
Okay, directly answering to your question, it's both knowledge, sharing knowledge. Of course, it doesn't mean that the company knows it's all best, and we can never take this granted. There are a lot of suppliers who are as professional as global leaders, but sharing knowledge between and the regular meetings that takes years, but then also financials. And as an example, I can say in some parts of the world where the production is really taking place, sometimes it's very difficult to get for smaller suppliers, for example, proper access to renewable electricity. That's why we usually help with PPA agreements, so that the bunch of suppliers can meet together and for example, have agreements, have good contracts with affordable costs for energy.
Then maybe Mats, I see you are already unmuted. What are your
yeah?
benefits for
Sorry for yeah. I can do that. Yeah, I think it's really, in our case, we don't have a lot of financial support. No, we have strict requirements. So it's sort of, if you want to be, and it's not for the current, it's more to award new business. So then to raise the bar on awarding new business, putting new requirements. So then it's part of their sort of contract and negotiation for those contracts that we include that. So we do it through the normal business. It should be done like that. But then I think we cannot underestimate that when we lead by sustainability in changes in companies, and that is sort of in our company, but also with suppliers, instead of doing the cost saving where you sort of do incremental slicing of cost, you think differently. And then you can sort of innovate and drive things in a different way. So often there are a lot of low-hanging fruits and cost savings by being more resource efficient. Normally, the climate emissions are related to energy use. And to save your energy is also saving money. So, I mean, the low-hanging fruits, and especially if you're early on your journey, you can in fact find a lot of cost savings, find new ways of doing things. And by that, I mean, like Kasia said, helping suppliers to get access to renewable energy. Renewable energy is, in fact, if you go to the source, cheaper to produce than any other energy form. I mean, solar and wind is cheaper. So by that, you do a cost saving by moving to renewables, but because of governments and other things. So I think IKEA has a fantastic model of working with their suppliers to get on-site renewables, PPAs and other things. And doing that, then their suppliers become more cost effective and lower their costs. So there is sort of a cost benefit to that as well, to transition. So I think that is more or less how we drive it. So really helping suppliers to find the cost savings by leading by sustainability and climate and energy.
Thank you. Yasha, what are your best practices? What do you think?
Yeah, I think like to add on this, I mean, like, it's data collection is also not a one-way street, we always say, right? Like the issue is, if you want something, right, you have to give something in some kind of way because you want to collaborate. I think like it's partnerships, right, that we're thinking about. And I mean, like, I can just give the examples. I mean, like, we work a lot with benchmarking tools and providing suppliers insights and transparency on where they stand in the supplier base of companies, right? That provides also external incentive to change, and it's something that they very much appreciate because that also drives then action, right? And suppliers tell us, this is the first time I see this, and I can compare to other companies, and really they take this to their steering board and say, okay, this we must do more here, and because other companies are already ahead of us. I think this is something that will be more and more driven also by the general, I think like the general, regulatory environment, right? Climate data is becoming financial data. It's becoming more and more really, and I think like that's also how we should think about all of that topic of climate transformation. It's a big opportunity. Leo said a very good point. It's about the change and adaptation of business models. We need to change our business models to survive in the future, and that's our role as as companies, right, and especially as the leaders in companies, that we need to make sure that we're adapting and I think that is both for suppliers and for buyers, and I think we're all suppliers in some way, right? If it's consumers or B2B, it's very important.
putting yourself in the shoes of the others and providing then the insights, not just collecting it, but also making suppliers part of it. I think I would first go to Leo and then Sonya. I have a special closing question, I assume. But yeah, Leo, what do you think? What helps your suppliers best? What is your best practice to give out? I think you did a long list, but what is standing on top? Where to start with?
Yeah, no, it's a topic that passionates me, and I'm a passionate of business, so it goes very well together. And I just want to make echo on what Yasha said because it said it in a very shorter way than me. A business model. Yeah, thanks for that. It's really really important. I remember every time this picture on LinkedIn when you have like those two pots for the fish, and there is one fish like jumping on the other one and saying like, if you want to get things you never get, you have to do things you never did. So you have to readapt your model, your transport, maybe revise who you work with. I think for supplier support, it's in both ways. Meaning, as you said, as customers, there is a lot of suppliers that have started a journey on their carbonization and everything, and a lot of them not. So it's also, I would say, in the selection that first of all you will strategically and directly say, okay, according to our strategy, we want to go this far in sustainability. So do we work with people that are really like top class on sustainability in the carriers pool or whatever carriers or transportation or warehousing that are top in cutting edge in everything around sustainability, or do we don't need that because it has also a cost? As I was answering in a question in the chat, is like the contract. There is no really defined standard today, so you can put sustainability within your contract, which I do, but you would have every time to really fine tune it, tailor it, negotiate it with your supplier, and to answer your question, kind of support them to make them understand what is your own roadmap. I think for me, the most support I bring to the supplier is this. They will need supplier on a more support on a more transactional level to understand what are our data, what our business model, what is our footprint, of course. But the most important, strategically speaking, is to explain them where do you want to go, and what are your constraints that you cannot go above. You know, you're a company. There is things you cannot do. So I think that's the most important, giving them, like with a team, a straight guidelines and straight objective, and supporting them through the journey.
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot, especially from SMEs, right? We touched on that as well. They're often like, everyone talks about it, but I really don't know what to do. Like, can you please, tell me where I should go and what are the next 3 steps? And Sonya, as promised, I think the biggest question in the end, and I'm always a little bit hesitating when I'm getting it, but where do you stand? I think we have this whole topic, Scope 3. It's not there just for talking about Scope 3. It's tied to climate. Where do you think we stand in that journey? Are we on a path staying well below 2 degrees? What do you wish to see much more for that from companies? What do you think we need to do in supply chain transformation to really have it connected to our goal in creating a climate compatible economy?
I mean, I think it's not an understatement to say that Scope 3 is going to be probably one of the biggest levers to unlock climate action globally. Scope 3 and supplier, what everyone here has been talking about, Danone, Erricson, IKEA, it crosses boundaries. If you look at the COP process, it relies on country governments signing up, and sometimes they're in, and sometimes they're out. Let's look at America, in and out, in and out. What all my learned panelists have said is building climate change, particularly 1.5 thinking values into business as usual or purchasing as usual, can have massive implications. It will cross boundaries. It also shows the value of the action. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should pay premiums for whatever, but what we have seen is that companies are starting to think, well, this is my ambition. I've signed up to an SBT. I'm committed. I've done very well on Scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is remaining a little bit tricky. I can't do that on my own. What I need to do is work with or pair up with suppliers or supply chains who replicate my values. And so here's something that we're seeing. At the moment, 11% of people that respond to CDP are integrating climate change into their purchasing processes, which is really low. Unsurprising, giving only 38% engage with their suppliers, but 11%. Here's an interesting bit, just to try and end on a little bit more of a positive note. 36% plan to change that in the next 2 to 3 years. Right? They're showing they're valuing it by building it into balanced scorecards, terms of reference, codes of conduct. They're showing that everything being equal, if there is you and a competitor and you're equal on price and you're equal on everything else, but they are aligned to a 1.5 future and you're not, I'm going to work with them. It's a no-brainer for us because they represent our values. So we're seeing more of that. It's slow going a little bit at the moment. And to bring it back to the 1.5, COP took a swing at corporates for the very first time. Very weirdly, it wasn't what I was expecting out of Egypt. You know, it's all meant to be about governments. And then they came up with an expert panel finding that corporates are greenwashing, or there was concerns around it. Out of that came SBTs and holding it to the highest level. Or being a science-based target, being a very credible climate target. So making sure that you're building the highest level of climate ambition into what you're doing is also going to be important. Only 0.04% of companies reporting to CDP say they're asking their suppliers to set SBTs. And I think some of the ones that are actually on this call, interestingly enough. But this is a really big start. We've got the likes of Carrefour, BT talking about contracts over certain amounts of money, having clauses in saying you have to commit to and sign up to an SBT in a certain time frame. The White House came out with that at COP. That was their finding, their own consultation on it. I can never remember the millions. I think it's $50 million, contracts over $50 million have to have an SBT or committed to setting one. Small, I can name them on two hands, but let's just say 10% of their suppliers adopt it, and then 10% of their suppliers adopt it. The power of supply chains from going from 10 companies to 1,000 to 10,000 through building it into business and normal is phenomenal. And I'm going to stop there. But in terms of the 1.5, I genuinely think supply chains could unlock and help resolve much action that is needed to achieve the 1.5 future. You're more powerful than you all know.
Amazing. That's, I think, a very nice closing word. Unlocking the power of transformation in supply chains. Thank you so much for all of our valuable speakers here and sharing, I would say, very practical insights and like all your steps that you have been taking. Also honored, that you are transparent about challenges. And we're gonna go deeper into collaboration also this afternoon and have a very exciting panel on that. But first of all, I thank you all for being here, for kicking off the second day in the morning and giving a lot of thoughts, brain for thoughts, food of thoughts. I'm not good in that one. For the rest of the day. And I'm sure we're all going to follow how your action gonna ripple effects in climate transformation. So first of all, thanks to everyone of the panelists. And from here,